Hello and welcome to this webinar today on querying your CV. My name is Steph. I am the Programs Manager for the Employability and Upskilling and the Arts and Heritage projects at Blossom LGBT. I use the he, him pronouns. So today we're going to look at practical ways to make your CV stand out for the workplace, academia, or any industry that you come across. Our host, Freddie, who will introduce himself in a moment, will share some some ways to structure your CV for clarity and impact, some techniques for using design tools, for example, Canva, Adobe, to enhance your CV aesthetics, and how to customize your CV for specific jobs, for specific industries. And finally, the best practices for integrating keywords and action verbs to meet the applicant tracking system standards. Um, Please remember to scan the QR code at the bottom of the screen that will show at the bottom of the screen in a minute. If you have any questions, comments, and you're welcome to stay anonymous, of course, and you can always leave your questions and comments on the platform where you're watching us. And Freddie, I will leave it to you.
Hello, my name is Freddie. I'm a freelance branding designer and Adobe certified professional in visual design. And I'm going to take you through just a couple of key design ideas that you can use to elevate your CV design and make it stand out from the crowd. So just to sort of explain what I'll be doing throughout this webinar, we'll be looking at color and how you can use little bits of color to enhance your CV, but also to show personality. Then we will look at text formatting, which is just the idea of what fonts you use, what weight you use, how to align them, and how to space them. And finally, we'll look at layout and just a couple of pointers on how to structure your CV properly, whilst including little bits of personality. So first up, color. A lot of the time, people may not necessarily think to add a little injection of color into their CV, but it can really help. And so what can this do? What can a little bit of color do for you? It may not be visible to the first sort of AI algorithmic stages. Yes, that's true. But it will be to the first human that sees your CV. And a little pop of color can add a distinguishing feature to your CV and help it stand out. It can also be a chance to show off a little bit of your personality. You could be remembered as, oh, that person had a nice little yellow or pink or otherwise section, and it really stood out, really created a memory. And it can also show an extra level of effort and initiative in producing your CV, which an initiative is one of the sort of key things that people are looking out for in any job application, because it's a vital characteristic to have. So let's start by thinking about color harmonies. What that means is how colors are grouped together based on how they appear on the color wheel. So the examples we have here, this is by no means an extensive list, but these are some good ones to start looking at. An analogous, where they are next to each other on the color wheel; complementary, where they are opposite each other on the color wheel; and triad, where they form a triangle; and monochromatic, which is a scheme of the same color but different shades. This slide to sort of illustrate what that actually means, if it was hard to picture in your head. So analogous on the first, there you have the sort of orange, red, pink, all close together. Monochromatic is just different shades of blue, triad, etc. And these all carry different sort of implications and associations. One word of warning I would give is to possibly avoid triad, as it can be quite a hard color harmony to manage. because the colors are also different and can end up often looking like sort of, it has an association with sort of cheaper and discounted products a lot of the time. So think of like fast food, budget supermarkets. So be careful with Triad because it's a harder one to manage. But yeah, there are many tools that can help you find a color scheme based on color harmonies, and I'll go through some of those in a bit. But to the next point about color, contrast is super important, and is a measure of how different the brightness of two colors are as they sit against each other. There should always be high contrast between text color and the background color. That is to say, it should be sort of light on dark, dark on light. And one of the reasons that more vivid colors can be difficult to balance in a color scheme, like for this sort of use, is that vivid colors have a sort of 50% brightness, so they're not really in the dark or light category. And as a good rule of thumb, as mentioned, keep your text as dark on light or light on dark, so this is easy to read. And I'll just have some examples here of what's good and bad contrast. So the two examples on the left both use sort of interesting colors, one with a sort of nice blue shade, the other with a nice pink shade, but the contrast is good enough that you can read what's in the little text bubble. Whereas the other two, because the contrast is much lower, it can be quite headache inducing to look at, and I won't keep this one on the screen for too long. So what are some practical tips I'd offer in that regard? Particularly bright colors should be used sparingly as accent features. Otherwise, you risk making the page look too busy and too populated. So only use them for little design features or for your name or something that just sort of adds a little refreshing pop of color. And colors that are too close to each other on the color wheel shouldn't be placed too close together in the design. And what I mean by that is don't have red text on a pink background, because that would, again, affect the contrast and be difficult to read. And I guess a final piece of advice here would be, if you're using complementary color schemes, make one end of the complementary color wheel lighter than the other, otherwise they can clash. And here are some resources. Adobe Color is particularly good because you could use color harmonies to produce your color scheme and base it on that, and you'll move it around physically on the wheel to find the thing that you're happy with. And it is free to use. It's one of the few Adobe products that is free to use, but you can then use it to store in your Creative Cloud libraries if you have access to it. Another good one is Coolers, which can help you, if you really have no idea, it can generate random palettes, and you just sort of say, oh, I like this thing, I like the next thing, and sort of select individual colors from what's randomly generated to say, oh, I want to keep that, move on, choose some other things that might go with it. But you can also, in all of these, explore existing libraries of color schemes to get inspiration from what people have already done. And Canva also has color palette generator, and you can even pull colors from an image and generate a color scheme based on an image. So say you have a selfie with with a filter on it that sort of just altered the colors, and you wanted to pick the colors out of that to use in the rest of your CV, then you have the possibility to do so with Canva. Now, on to the next section, which will be talking about how to sort of choose fonts, what fonts are appropriate, how to change your text, how to use like text weight, starting with font types. So again, this is by no means an exhaustive list of the types of fonts that are available, but these are just some of the most popular and the ones you'll see the most often. Starting with serif. So a serif font refers to the little flicks you get at the end of letters, and it's good for a traditional or luxury or newsprint vibe. Slab serif is similar, but the serifs are square rather than curved, and that's good for a modern or academic vibe. And then you have sans serif, which is cleaner letters without the little flicks at the bottom. It's good for a sort of professional, corporate, minimalist vibe. Cursive are fonts based on handwriting, and they're very good for a creative, personal, or refined vibe. And then finally in this list, decorative, which are the more sort of wacky fonts that look, either a bit sci-fi or a bit bubblegum or a bit and I would say approach those with caution, because they're good for lighthearted or for specific industries that you're applying for. Say you're applying for a job in the games industry and you thought, oh, this pixelated font could be a nice accent feature of it. Yes, that works, but approach with caution, because some of them have their own issues. And here we go. Here's just an illustration of the kind of thing I'm talking about. So each one, hopefully it's a bit clearer here rather than just me rambling descriptions at you. But yeah, so serif is, think Times New Roman, the classic fonts you get when you first open up a Word document will often be serif, then slab serif, sans serif, cursive, and decorative. Now, there are things to consider when using these. For example, all kinds of serif fonts can be harder for certain populations to read, as studies have shown them to be more difficult for dyslexic people to read. So use with caution. Sans serif is the most accessible category of font and always the safer choice. And cursive and decorative often have issues with legibility. Similar to bright colors, serif, decorative, and cursive fonts should be accent pieces. For example, use the serif or cursive or decorative font as headings, or just as your name at the top, because otherwise you don't want the page to be illegible. And yeah. Another point on text formatting is alignment and spacing, which is all about where the text starts from, which is alignment, and spacing is the sort of how much space you leave between. You want to make sure that your spacing is consistent. It doesn't need to be a specific thing, as long as the space between each section of your CV is even, and has the same sort of gaps within the sections as well. You want to only really use left-aligned text, so text that starts from the left-hand side. Center alignment can work for small sections of text, maximum 1 to 3 lines, and never use right alignment. Headings and titles can be the exception to this, as you might see, you may recall seeing headings where that are sat in the middle above the text, or even to the right above the text. And just as an example, this is sort of what headings look like, either left, center, or right aligned. As you can see, the two on the left, the left hand and the middle one, feel a little bit more natural, whereas the headings on the right can look good, but you have to be careful that you're not going to have too jagged an edge at the side after the heading, otherwise it can make it look a little bit messy. And to illustrate why center alignment text isn't that great for large bodies of text, just look at the left-hand side on the center aligned text, it starts from a different place each time, which goes against the sort of natural way we read things as left to right readers. Obviously, this flips over for any time you might be writing something for a right to left audience, but even then, center alignment would still have the same sort of issues. So next point is about text weight, which is how thick each letter is. Font weight can be used for emphasis and drawing attention to particular details. For example, you could use it to highlight key professional skills so that someone scanning your document, just sort of having a brief look over, can see, I've got that, they've got that skill, they've got that skill, and then they can look later for the full elaboration on that skill. You'll see an example of this later. And different font weights for headings and titles is standard practice, as it creates a nice flow and leads the eye down the page. So you may be asking, oh, well, I just use normally the fonts that first pop up, but where can I find additional ones that may not be on the app that you're using to make your CV? So you have Adobe Fonts, which has a huge library of some really nice, especially very nice decorative fonts, but it is only available to Creative Cloud subscribers. Google Fonts, however, is entirely free for personal use, and a CV is personal use. And there is a huge variety of there. You might not get as many of the fun and wackier fonts that you may be looking for, but it has a huge variety. You may even spend too much time. I've spent too much time looking at the Google Fonts pages before. And then for a sort of happy medium between the two, you have Behance, which has a mixture of free and paid fonts. Frequently, they have like sales and offers on as well. So now we go on to the final section, which is all about layout. So how you structure the information within your CV. We've talked about how the individual aspects of it should look, and now how do you piece it together? So a good place to start can be using headers and footers, or at least some kind of sections to break up the information into sort of more digestible pieces. And these can be a great way to incorporate the interesting color scheme you picked. For example, a header can be used for your basic information like name and contact details, and anything else you sort of see as important but set aside from your main bulk of skills. Whereas a footer could be used for extra information like links to your portfolios or examples of your work or your referee details, who the people would turn to for references. And this is not a hard and fast rule, but my personal recommendation would be to keep the header the same across any additional pages that you have, but vary the footer content, because it's very standard practice in the sort of print publishing kind of world to have, say, think of a book where you have like the title and the chapter name at the top, but then the page number at the bottom varies. Yeah. So here's just an example of the difference a nice colored header and footer can make. It just sort of adds that, okay, I instantly know what the important information is, that the focus is, and now I also know what the skipping ahead. So yes, back to what I was saying, that yeah, you instantly know what information is important and what else is sort of extra information that doesn't necessarily pertain to your job application, more practical information. And then within layout, we have hierarchy, which is about how you focus and order the information based on what is most relevant to the job you're applying for. And such using information hierarchy, you can make your CV sort of very at a glance, easy to read, as it'll, as again I mentioned before, people's eyes will flow down the page if they see sort of headers, subheadings, etc. For example, when listing education, have the qualification in bold as a heading, with the institution and graduation date directly below as a subheading. And here we have an example of that. This is one of the things from my CV. It's shortened for purposes of this, but as you can see, there is the qualification in bold at the top, the institution and the date below in same size, but in a regular font weight. And then, as I mentioned before, with text weight, the skills within there that are relevant are bolded so that they can scan and immediately the eyes will find the skills they're looking for. And the next section is all about margins, which is very important. And some software will automatically set them up for you. For example, if you're using Word or Google Docs, that will be baked into the document from the start. Whereas if you use, say, Canva, Photoshop, or InDesign, you may have to set them and adhere to them yourself and sort of manually adjust things to make sure that they're within the margins. These margins should be consistent. Again, as with the alignment and spacing, consistency is key. And whilst consistency overall is good, you can have some variations. For example, the header and the footer can have different margins to the rest of the text, but should have the same as each other to keep a sort of uniform feel. So as an example of that, you have one on the left that has no margins, and one on the right that has margins and differing margins between the sections, but overall consistency. It just makes it look a lot more professional and in line with sort of what best practices are. So some practical tips I would give in regards to layout are, if possible, reflect the position you're applying for. So journalism, print media, anything along those lines, you could have columns to reflect that, okay, this is what I'm going for, or you could organize it like a flowchart if you're going for something like UI, UX, or development. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but definitely keep it in mind. And if you can, it will always make the CV stand out. The bulk of the space in your CV should be occupied by the most important informations. So your qualifications, skills, and experience. Anything else goes in the headers and footers to the side so that it's there. So your contact information, your referee details, that's the stuff that they will be looking at once they've made the decision, once they've thought, okay, I like what I'm seeing on here. I like the fact that they've got this skill, and this qualification, this experience. So have that be the focus. Don't bloat the main section with any extra information. And you can use headings and subheadings to guide the reader down the page, as sort of people's eyes tend to naturally follow the hierarchy of the page. just make it as smooth a reading experience as possible for them. And I believe that brings me to the end of my little presentation, and
Hi.
etc.
We've got a couple of questions coming in actually, so I am going to read that for you if I can just find them. All right. Bear with me while my internet opens the page. So someone said, what are the common mistakes that we usually make in a CV? There's another question I'll ask you later after you respond to this one.
So, from a design standpoint, I would say that not having sections is probably the big mistake that people can make, and not sort of endeavoring to make the information as sort of categorized as possible. So having sections like work, experience, education, skills delineated by headings, and even sort of text boxes or a different sort of an alternating color scheme can really help boost the can boost the legibility, because people are more receptive to information that is categorized. So people will take on board the information if they understand why it's there, and sections can help do that. And then the other one I'd say is potentially using fonts that are difficult to read. They think, oh, I personally like this aspect, and thinking about what they like themselves, rather than what is the best thing for what is the best thing to be the middle ground between showing your personality, but also conveying your professionalism. Yeah, I guess those are my I had to give two then, sorry.
That's fine. The other question is, I am just starting my career and I don't have a lot of experience. What can I write in my CV? Like, what advice, I guess?
So in that situation, I would you can, because it's perfectly fine in any situation to talk about things like personal projects and education, things that came before career, as at that point that is all you will have. So you can talk about things, say if you're creative, you can talk about sort of any passion projects that you've done in your own time that have been more hobby related. You can talk about how your experience with education, how you feel you did then. As long as it always comes back to some kind of relevant skill, so you feel that you had a great time with in school or college or university with say an extracurricular, that can always be a thing to add to show that because that shows a couple of things. That will show potentially an extra skill, that will show potentially that you can commit to things. So it's not all about work experience. Work experience helps in any situation, but you're not necessarily hindered by not having it. And there are other things you can talk about, as I said, extracurricular activities, passion projects, any volunteering. They are all great options to talk about in your CV. And yeah.
Okay. Another question. It's a bit of a long one. I have done different types of jobs and they are not in the same industries. For example, I've worked in hospitality, in corporations, and in charity sectors. If I want to cater my CV to a specific job, there will be a lot of break times, but they are not so. I'd just be in a different industry during that time. How can I address that?
Well, I would say it's always worth including anything. You don't have to only include the experience that's relevant to to the thing you're applying to. It's more about focusing on the ones that are relevant to what you're applying to, because there's always going to be transferable skills that work between any kind of job. Um, so things like communication, presentation skills, sort of and being even just being in work, even if it was in different industries, shows a level of work ethic, and in fact shows a level of adaptability which can be very good in any job, particularly high pressure environments. They'll be looking for adaptability and the ability to sort of flex into different aspects of the job. But yeah, no, I'd say always include it. Potentially, you can always sort of break it up into sort of different sections, so that sort of one is sort of the more relevant to what you've done, and then the other one can be a sort of a brief summary of other things you've done, and including some of the sort of transferable skills, as I mentioned before, that would be relevant to what you're applying for. So yes, it's also more about catering your CV to what you're applying for now rather than what it has been. So yeah, always include it full. Like you don't in a CV, you don't need to list everything anyway. It's just a sort of should be a sort of an amalgamation of what you think is what you think puts your best foot forward. You at the end of the day, you're trying to sell yourself. So yeah.
Do you think it's important to include references on your CV, or should that be left out until requested?
Um, I think it is important to an extent, because even if it's just sort of not including the full details to show that you have them and that you have people that they can go back to and ask about, their experiences working with you. I wouldn't say it's essential at all. And if you don't want your current employers to find out that you're looking for something, for example, you can sort of omit them and maybe just have a little section to say, a little note to say references can be provided upon request. Just make it clear, like indicate some way that you have them and you are willing to. But most prospective employers will understand that you don't always want to broadcast that you're looking elsewhere. So yeah, it's not an essential, but I in my experience, I'd say the times I didn't include it, I did worse. But even then, I had like just a thing saying can be provided upon request, just to hammer home that they're there waiting. Yeah.
Should people include their social media profiles or portfolios on their CV? If so, what's the best way to do it?
If it's relevant to the job, the position that you're applying for, yes, absolutely. So say if you're applying for a social media role, and you have, say, some social media accounts that have gained some following, seen some success, then yes, I would say to include that. Portfolios is a slightly different one because oftentimes it'll be asked for alongside if you're applying for a creative role, for example. And that will be part of the application process anyway. But one of the ways you can do that is to, for both of this answer goes for both of them. Sorry, one of the ways you can include both a reference and social media is if you can add links to PDFs. I know that there's issues with PDFs at the moment, but for creative stuff, it tends to be a bit more PDF. As long as you save it as an interactive PDF, that's how you preserve that. Another great way to do links like that is to use a QR code that someone could then just scan. You can find, if you just type into Google, you'll find it like QR code generator. There's all sorts of places that will give you something that then people can scan. Just there's one at the bottom of this presentation right now. So you can always find something, a way to put something like that in. A more subtle way would be to include the handles of the social media and just sort of like have like Instagram, TikTok, whatever, and the handle beside it. Just be careful to write them exactly as they are, because there can always be random full stops or hyphens and underscores and things that can throw things off. But yes, if you can, I would say include links to things where it's relevant. If it's not relevant to the job at all, then don't feel like you have to, because you don't, especially if it's a personal social media as well, because as long as you would only want to give your personal social media if it's a particularly clean slate. Be careful with putting personal social medias in employment situations because they might not like what they see. For no good reason either. It could just be, baseless, but they might see things that they think are, so word of caution about putting personal social medias, but professional ones, anything where you're, taking it seriously as a content creator, for example, yes, include it where it's relevant.
I'm just gonna have a quick look through our platforms to see if anyone has left another question. Doesn't look like it. Looks like these are the last of the questions. So
Okay.
Did you have another slide on this, by the way? Sorry.
Yep, it was just
Sorry.
It was just a thank you and best of luck in your future applications. That's all. Just a little, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Freddie, thank you everyone for joining us on this Querying Your CV webinar. Thank you, Freddie, for sharing all of all of these techniques and stuff. It's personally been very helpful to learn that fonts can be difficult to read for some people. I didn't really know it was studied, even though I do struggle with some fonts. Sometimes it's more like aesthetic, but sometimes it's like, oh, this is too much for me to see. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and your engagement. And before we conclude, I would like to encourage you to reach out with any remaining questions, just in case you remember something later on or you watch this again, and please give us your feedback. It's incredibly important to us. So take a moment to share your thoughts. You can follow us on Instagram, on YouTube, LinkedIn, on Eventbrite. Stay informed about all of the future events, our webinars, our workshops, and sign up our mailing list as well. And lastly, if you're interested in the mentoring scheme for queer youth, whether as a mentor or mentee, please reach out to us for information. Um, have a great evening and take care. Freddie, did you want to share some of your ways to contact you or?
Yeah, so I have my professional pages on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn, just under the name Jagged Quartz. If you should just be able to type it in or pop up with the same sort of logo as is in my slides, and you'll find me that way.
Cool. And they're also on Eventbrite. If you go back to the event page, you will find them. All right.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, everyone, and see you soon.